Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're doing something pretty unique, I think. We're really getting into the nuts and bolts of what makes an organization, well, work and resilient. We're using this incredible historical case study, the organizational systems, the leadership established by the Prophet Muhammad in, the very early days of the community in Medina, way back in the 7th century.
That's right. And our source material here, it's not your typical business school case study or management book. It's based on a really close reading of excerpts focusing specifically on this period.
Right.
And the core question for us, and really the mission for you listening, is how did a leader step into a situation defined by, frankly, chaos, tribal fights, not enough resources, and actually engineer systems, systems for administration, for real justice, and crucially, for accountability?
I really like that framing because the idea underneath it all is just so powerful, isn't it? This whole deep dive, it's fundamentally about why strong systems often matter more than just having one brilliant person at the top.
Yeah, exactly. We all love the idea of the genius CEO, the charismatic visionary.
Sure.
But what these sources highlight, and it's a tough lesson sometimes, is that individual talent, no matter how amazing, it's temporary, it's limited. If the system, the structure they're working within is weak or unfair or just completely opaque, well, the whole thing just crumbles eventually, maybe when the leader leaves or maybe just when the next big crisis hits.
Right. It can't sustain itself.
Precisely. So the focus has to be on fixing the systems, not just finding the next superstar leader. That's the timeless takeaway here, I think.
And that feels incredibly relevant right now. I mean, think about it. Whether you're bogged down in modern bureaucracy trying to get anything done, or maybe you're on the cutting edge trying to figure out how to ethically use something like advanced AI in your work. Fundamentally, you're wrestling with structural problems.
You are.
So if we want solutions for today's fractured organizations, maybe looking at how a system was built from basically nothing in a place that was already deeply fractured, that's a pretty good place to start.
Exactly. Let's see how it was done when the stakes were arguably even higher.
Okay, so let's dive into Medina then. Paint the picture for us. What was it actually like on the ground when the Prophet arrived? Organizationally speaking, what was the starting point?
Starting point almost sounds too organized. It was more like, well, organizational quicksand, maybe? The challenges weren't abstract. They were immediate. They were existential.
Right.
You had this incredibly diverse mix of people, all thrown together, all carrying, heavy historical baggage and deep-seated loyalties.
Tell us more about that diversity, because it's not just like different opinions around a boardroom table. This is fundamental differences in how society even worked, right? Different loyalties.
Absolutely. So first you have the Muhajirun. These are the immigrants from Makkah, the early converts who followed the Prophet. They arrived with basically nothing.
Refugees, essentially.
Yes, exactly. No land, no local family ties, no economic base. They're totally dependent. And they're trying to integrate with the locals in Medina, the Ansar, the helpers who welcome them.
Okay, so two distinct groups of Muslims already.
Two distinct groups. But even among the Ansar, the locals, unity was, well, it was a recent development. And a fragile one.
And this is where that pre-existing organizational mess really comes into focus.
Exactly. Before Islam started offering a different way, the two main local tribes, the Ghais and Khazraj, they'd been locked in these incredibly destructive blood feud cycles for generations.
Wow.
Their whole social structure was based on clan loyalty and, frankly, revenge, not civic cooperation. The sources talk about constant squabbles over the absolute essentials, water access, grazing rights, who controls the trade routes. Tiny things could spark major conflict.
So if you're living in Medina back then, before this shift, your first loyalty is your family, your clan. And your default setting towards other groups is suspicion, maybe even hostility. That's like the polar opposite of a functioning society.
It's institutional gridlock. And then you have to layer on top of that the established non-Muslim communities, especially the various Jewish tribes who had their own internal structures, their own alliances, their own long history in the oasis.
Right. So multiple layers of potential conflict.
Absolutely. Any attempt to impose some kind of central order before this, it was just doomed from the start. The organizational friction, the built-in resistance was just way too high.
When you describe it like that, the missing piece seems so obvious. It's that legal void you mentioned. If a fight breaks out between, say, someone from the Oz tribe and one of these newly arrived Muhajir, how does that get resolved?
Well, that's the point. It doesn't get resolved impartially. It gets settled based on power. Who has more muscle? whose tribe is bigger or better armed, who can threaten more effectively. There was no shared standard of justice that everyone agreed on.
So no independent referee.
None. And without that unified legal framework, there's no accountability that goes beyond your own little group. Your loyalty is to your tribe, right or wrong. And that lack of a higher authority is exactly what kept those cycles of conflict spinning and spinning.
You know, it sounds disturbingly familiar. You think about modern companies where different departments act like little kingdoms.
Oh, absolutely. Fiefdoms.
Yeah, guarding their budgets, their projects, their headcount. They forget the overall mission. And when conflicts pop up between them, it often gets resolved based on who has the CEO's ear, not on what's actually fair or best for the whole organization.
It's that classic organizational disease, isn't it? Where internal politics just consistently overrides any sense of shared purpose or institutional justice. And that is precisely why the sources we looked at identify the Charter of Madinah as such a foundational organizational move. It wasn't just, a political statement. It was the actual constitutional blueprint designed specifically to fill that legal vacuum.
Okay, so how did the charter do that? What was in it, practically speaking, that provided the structure needed? How did it start enforcing accountability where there basically was none before?
Well, the genius of it really was that it created a kind of super tribe, an ummah, a single community. And membership in this community, defined by the charter, explicitly superseded your old clan identity.
Huh?
It laid down clear, written rules of engagement for everyone living in Medina. And critically, this is maybe the most revolutionary part. Its clauses guaranteed protection and justice, not just for Muslims, but for all the signatory groups, including the Jewish tribes.
That's huge. That goes completely against the grain of tribal exclusivity.
Totally unprecedented for its time and place. And that's the key organizational takeaway for anyone listening. It forced a massive psychological shift, but also an operational one. It said, look, your duties as a resident under this new framework, bound by these laws, are now more important than your ancient blood ties. It built inclusiveness right into the foundations. It wasn't just imposing rules, it was creating shared ownership. By clearly defining the rights and the responsibilities for every single subgroup, it distributed the burden of maintaining stability across the entire organization, if you will.
So everyone had skin in the game.
Exactly. The charter basically said, okay, externally, we act as one. An attack on one group is an attack on all. Internally, we resolve disputes based on these agreed-upon rules, apply it impartially. That leaped from a structure based on tribal power to one based on civic contract and law. I mean, that's about as profound an organizational pivot as you can imagine.
Okay, so the charter lays down the law, quite literally. It provides the why and the framework. Now, how do you make that real? How do you turn a document into a functioning state? Our sources stress that this wasn't just about ideals. It needed practical administrative steps, but always tied to that strong moral core. The system had to weave together faith, values, and practical function.
Yeah, precisely. You can't separate them in this model. So the first big structural solution was a direct response to the fact that the community was growing geographically and in complexity. That was mechanism one. Decentralization of authority.
Makes sense. You can't run everything from the center once you start expanding beyond the city itself.
Impossible and inefficient. So governors and administrators were appointed for different regions, different tribes, different specific functions. This ensured local issues could be handled locally, adapting to specific needs on the ground.
But hang on, that's where things often go wrong, right?
Right.
You decentralize, you give local leaders power, and suddenly they start acting like little kings in their own right. They build their own power bases, maybe skim off the top, ignore the central rules. How did they stop that classic fragmentation?
The age-old problem. Balancing local autonomy with central control and ethical consistency. The answer here was mechanism 2, direct and strict accountability. This is absolutely crucial.
Okay, how did that work in practice?
Every single appointed leader, whether they were a regional governor, a tax collector, a military commander, they didn't report through layers of bureaucracy. They reported directly back to the prophet in Medina.
Wow, okay. Flat structure.
Very flat, very direct. It created these incredibly clear lines of communication and responsibility. There was nowhere to hide, really.
It sounds almost like, a modern tech startup's org chart, maybe.
Yeah.
But without all those VPs and senior directors in the middle diffusing responsibility.
Exactly. It eliminated those organizational black holes where information gets lost, twisted, or delayed, and where accountability just evaporates. The prophet didn't just delegate the task, say, go govern Yemen. He maintained oversight of the results they achieved and, importantly, the methods they used to achieve them.
Ah, the how mattered as much as the what.
Absolutely. Were they being just? Were they following the principles of the charter? Were they transparent? This constant feedback loop was key to stopping those regional fiefdoms from developing and ensuring everyone stayed aligned with the core mission.
Okay, so you've got decentralized administration, but tightly controlled, centralized reporting and accountability. For that whole system to hold together, people from all those different backgrounds, the Oz, the Khazraj, the Muhajirun, the Jewish tribes, they all have to fundamentally trust it, which brings us to the bedrock, right?
Yeah.
Mechanism 3, the uncompromising justice system.
Yes, this was non-negotiable. It was the absolute foundation. If people even suspected that justice wasn't being applied fairly, that some groups got preferential treatment, the whole fragile structure would have collapsed overnight. Trust was everything.
So the system had to prove itself.
Consistently.
Day in, day out.
Yeah.
It had to demonstrate, through actual cases, that the law applied equally to everyone. Didn't matter if you were rich or poor, powerful or weak, from a prominent tribe or a newcomer, Muslim or non-Muslim signatory to the charter, the rules were the rules. But hold on. For a leader today, hearing about such a rigorous, maybe even rigid system, doesn't that risk crushing initiative? Does it sound too impersonal? Where's the room for empathy, for individual circumstances?
That's a really important question, and I think the perspective here is slightly different. The rigor wasn't intended to crush individual spirit. It was designed to guarantee equity. And equity actually empowers people, especially those who historically had no power or voice.
Ah, okay, so the strictness protects the vulnerable.
Exactly. When people trust that the system is fair, it actually creates psychological safety. It frees them up to focus on contributing, on innovating, on building things, rather than constantly having to watch their back or play political games to protect their interests. Rigorous justice, in this sense, boosts organizational trust and performance.
That's a counterintuitive take for some modern management theories, maybe?
Perhaps. But to build that level of trust, the system and the leader at the top had to be willing to make painful choices. To demonstrate that the principles weren't just words, it required sometimes difficult organizational self-correction.
Give us that specific example you mentioned earlier, the one from the sources that really hammers this home. The commitment to justice above all else.
Right. There's this very famous incident. A woman from a very powerful and noble tribe, the Banu Makhzum, was caught stealing. Now, theft carried a severe prescribed penalty. Her relatives were, understandably, desperate to avoid the punishment and the public shame for their tribe.
High stakes.
Very high stakes. So they approached a companion who was very close to the Prophet, Usama ibn Zayd, and asked him to intercede on her behalf, to ask for leniency.
Kind of pulling strings using connections.
Exactly, trying to leverage influence. When Usama brought this request to the Prophet, his reaction was immediate and severe. He didn't just refuse, he gathered the people together.
He made it a public teaching moment.
A very public and powerful one. He addressed the crowd and said, essentially, that the reason nations before them had been destroyed was precisely this. They applied the law strictly to the poor and the weak, but they let the wealthy and the influential off the hook.
Wow. Drawing a direct line between unequal justice and societal collapse.
He didn't mince words. And then, to drive the point home with absolute clarity, he made that famous declaration. He said, "By God, if Fatima, his own daughter, if Fatima, daughter of Muhammad, were to steal, I would cut off her hand."
That's an incredible statement. Sacrificing even the idea of familial preference for the sake of the system's integrity.
It's the ultimate demonstration, isn't it? He publicly showed that his personal loyalties, his family ties, were secondary to the impartial application of the law. That act, more than any decree, is what cemented profound, lasting trust across all those previously warring factions. The message was crystal clear. The system is sacred. No one is above it. Period.
That kind of principled stand. Yeah, that builds loyalty in a way that, a corporate mission statement on the wall just never can.
Okay, so justice is the bedrock. Let's talk about the physical organization. Mechanism 4, the hub of governance, the Masjid al-Nabawi, the Prophet's mosque in Medina. Our sources say this wasn't just a mosque in the modern sense, it was the physical heart of the whole operation. Yes, this was a stroke of organizational design genius, really. It directly addressed the problem of fragmentation, different parts of the state operating in silos. By deliberately co-locating multiple essential functions in one central place, they prevented that separation of purpose that plagues so many organizations.
So it physically integrated different aspects of community life and governance. How did that work? What actually happened there?
Well, think about how we often structure things today. You've got, say, the government offices in one part of town, the courts in another, maybe the main place of worship somewhere else, the university or library in a different district, and the social welfare office. Who knows where that is?
Right, all separate, siloed.
Exactly. In Medina, the masjid served simultaneously as the primary place for collective worship, constantly reinforcing those shared values and the ethical core. It was the main center for education, disseminating knowledge, standardizing the culture, teaching the principles of the charter. It was the seat of governance where political consultations happened, disputes were judged, ambassadors were received, major decisions were announced. Wow.
And critically, it was also the central hub for welfare distribution, especially for the poorest, the muhajirun, who needed support.
Yeah.
Aid was collected and distributed right there.
So by putting all these functions under one roof, quite literally you create these incredibly tight feedback loops. A political decision made over here can't easily ignore the ethical principles being taught 10 feet away, or the needs of the people receiving aid right there.
Precisely. It forces a kind of practical alignment. It fosters transparency because people could see these different functions happening together. Leaders making decisions were physically present with the people affected by those decisions and grounded in the same value system being reinforced daily through worship and education.
That feels like the absolute opposite of the modern tendency towards hyper-specialization and especially now remote teams where everyone's physically disconnected. It is. When teams and functions are fragmented, physically and digitally, it's so easy to lose sight of the bigger picture, the holistic purpose. The ethical framework can become abstract. The masjid, in this context, acted as the organizational glue, constantly reminding everyone of the integrated nature of their community and its mission.
Right, so we've got the foundational structure, the charter providing the legal basis, decentralization handled with strict accountability, unwavering justice as the bedrock, and the masjid is the integrated physical hub. Now, the organization has to actually perform. It needs to operate efficiently, it needs to grow, it needs to handle challenges. Our sources suggest this next phase, operational excellence, it requires a blend.
Yeah.
Discipline plus innovation. How did they transition from just having the rules to actually achieving high performance day to day?
Yeah, the focus shifts here towards execution and optimization. The first pillar underpinning this was Pillar A, expert delegation. And this builds on the earlier point about decentralization, but it's more specific. It wasn't just about assigning tasks to reduce the prophet's own workload. It was a deliberate strategy to identify individuals with specific skills and proven integrity, and then empower them within the established system to really multiply the organization's capacity.
Okay, so it's not just delegation. It's empowerment based on competence and character.
Exactly. It's strategic capability building. This is a critical distinction for leaders today, I think. Good delegation isn't just offloading work you don't want to do. It's about investing trust and resources in the right people to achieve specific outcomes aligned with the overall mission.
And how did they ensure these empowered individuals stayed true to the system's standards, especially if they're operating further away?
Well, first, the selection process was key. They looked for companions who had demonstrated both competence, maybe in financial matters, military tactics, diplomacy, whatever it was, and an unwavering commitment to those core values of justice and transparency we talked about.
So skill and values, both were necessary.
Non-negotiable combination. And once these individuals were appointed and empowered, they were given the functional autonomy, the space to actually use their expertise and make decisions quickly. But, and this is crucial, they always knew that mechanism 2, the direct accountability back to the center, was firmly in place.
Right, the oversight was always there.
Always. So they had freedom to act, but within clear boundaries and with the knowledge that their performance, both in results and methods, would be reviewed. This approach turned potential bottlenecks, things only the leader could decide, into operational force multipliers.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, moving to Pillar B, standardization of processes. We talked about the chaos before, the tribal conflicts often sparked by inconsistent practices. Standardization seems like the antidote to that.
Absolutely. If you want to scale an organization, especially one built from diverse parts, standardization becomes the common language. Inconsistency is the enemy of trust and efficiency. It just breeds disputes, confusion, and accusations of unfairness.
So where do they focus their standardization efforts? What were the critical areas?
Our sources highlight a few key ones. First, a classic organizational challenge in any society: taxes, or in this case, zakat.
The mandatory charity or wealth tax.
Exactly. Before standardization, you can imagine different administrators in different areas applying slightly different rules. What counts as taxable wealth? What's the exact rate? How is it collected? Who decides how it's distributed locally? This could lead to huge variations and potential injustice.
Right. Fertile ground for corruption or just confusion.
Definitely. So they established clear, consistent rules that applied everywhere. What specific types of assets were subject to zakat, what the precise percentages were, the mechanism for collection, and the categories for distribution, the poor, the needy, etc. This eliminated ambiguity, ensured the burden was shared fairly, and made the distribution of welfare predictable and transparent.
That predictability is huge, right? Not just for fairness, but for the economy, too. People and businesses know what to expect.
Precisely. It allows planning. The second major area was external relations, the formulation of treaties.
How did they standardize that?
Well, traditionally, treaties in that region were often very personal agreements between, say, two tribal chiefs, highly dependent on their individual relationship, their word. And often, the treaty died when one of the chiefs died. Very unstable.
Right. No institutional continuity.
None. So the new state developed standardized guidelines for how treaties should be negotiated, what core principles they must contain, like mutual defense or terms of trade, and the formal process for ratification. This transformed treaty making from a fragile personal pact into a stable institutional process. The agreement was with the state of Madinah, represented by its system, not just with an individual leader.
So the system itself provides the continuity, not just the person. That's a massive shift.
Huge for long-term stability and predictable foreign relations. And finally, related to both internal stability and external relations, they standardized guidelines for trade and commerce.
Things like fair weights and measures, contract enforcement.
Exactly those kinds of things. Establishing clear ethical standards for business dealings, ensuring honesty in transactions, standardizing measurements, all designed to reduce friction, prevent disputes, and build trust in the marketplace, both internally and with trading partners. So, you see, standardization wasn't about creating rigid bureaucracy for its own sake. It was a powerful tool for reducing conflict, enhancing fairness, and enabling scale.
Makes perfect sense. Standardization builds the reliable rails the organization runs on. But pure discipline, pure standardization can sometimes lead to rigidity, right? What happens when the external environment throws a massive curveball? That brings us to Pillar C, adaptability and innovation. How do you make sure a system built on clear rules and structures can still pivot, can still innovate when circumstances demand it?
That's the crucial balancing act. The structure needs to be firm on principles like justice, but flexible in tactics and strategy. The system shouldn't become an ideological cage that prevents effective action. It needs to value the ultimate outcome, the survival and flourishing of the community, over rigid adherence to past methods.
And the classic example of this adaptability in action.
The sources point very clearly to the strategic pivot during the Battle of the Trench, also known as the Battle of Azab. This was a major siege of Medina by a large confederation of opposing tribes.
Okay, and traditional Arab warfare at the time, it wasn't really about siegecraft, was it? More about cavalry charges, individual duels, set-piece battles out in the open.
Exactly. That was the norm, pitched battles. But facing overwhelming numbers, the standard approach likely meant annihilation. So a different strategy was needed.
And the innovation was.
The decision, reportedly suggested by Salman the Persian, a companion with knowledge of military tactics from outside Arabia, was to dig a massive defensive trench around the vulnerable northern approach to Medina. This was completely unconventional for Arab warfare, a huge logistical and engineering challenge.
So adopting a foreign, non-traditional tactic.
Yes. And crucially, the organizational system was flexible enough and the leadership consultative enough to embrace this radical idea. It wasn't just a top-down command ignored by resentful tribal units. The sources suggest it was discussed, agreed upon, and then importantly, the existing structures of delegation and coordination were used to rapidly mobilize the entire community to dig the trench. Different sections were assigned to different groups.
That's fascinating. It means the unity built by the charter, the delegation mechanisms, the trust in the leadership, it was all strong enough to execute a complex, unfamiliar plan under immense pressure. They prioritized the mission survival over sticking to how we've always fought.
Precisely. It proved the system wasn't brittle. It was a disciplined framework for effective action, not a straitjacket. It showed that the organization had built in the psychological safety and the operational capacity for leaders and members to propose, adopt, and execute dramatic innovations when the situation demanded it. That combination of discipline and values and execution, plus agility and strategy, that's the hallmark of a truly dynamic and resilient organization.
Okay, let's make the leap now. We've unpacked this incredible historical example building a state from chaos in 7th century Medina. How does this ancient organizational wisdom speak to us right now in the 21st century?
Well, the striking thing is how relevant those core challenges still feel. Those historical problems, the tribal divisions, the fights over resources, the lack of clear rules or accountability, they have direct parallels in the struggles of modern corporations, nonprofits, even government agencies.
Yeah, the labels change, but the dysfunctions often look depressingly similar.
They really do. When we diagnose the chronic illnesses of contemporary organizations, we see those old patterns of disorder just repeating themselves, usually because the underlying systems are flawed.
So what are the modern versions of these afflictions? What are we trying to solve today that mirrors that early chaos?
Well, number one, almost universally, is bureaucracy. Systems that become so complex, so rigid, so focused on process over purpose that they just slow everything down. They become self-serving, frustrating employees and making the organization sluggish and unresponsive.
The red tape problem.
Exactly. Then there's the endemic lack of accountability. Responsibility gets so spread out, so diffused across layers of management, endless committees, cross-functional teams, that when something inevitably goes wrong, it's almost impossible to pinpoint who or what system is actually responsible.
Right. The classic, it wasn't my department, or it fell through the cracks.
Precisely. The system itself allows accountability to vanish. Third, we still see that internal division. Maybe it's not Oz versus Khazraj anymore, but it's marketing versus sales or R&D versus operations, acting like warring tribes.
Yeah, protecting their turf, their budgets, their KPIs, even if it hurts the overall company goal.
Exactly. Prioritizing internal goals over the collective mission. And the warning from these historical sources feels incredibly potent here. Systems that aren't built on a clear, strong ethical foundation, systems that lack that commitment to justice and transparency, they don't actually empower people. They often end up, maybe unintentionally, enslaving them through needless complexity, opaque rules, or subtle built-in unfairness.
And now, layer onto all of that existing dysfunction, the sheer speed and disruption of the digital age.
Yeah.
Especially with AI, it feels like technology is adding whole new layers of potential friction.
Oh, absolutely. It's accelerating the complexity and introducing entirely new challenges that demand robust systems thinking. Let's talk about a few specific ones for the AI era.
Okay.
Challenge 1. Data overload. We used to struggle with not enough information. Now, especially with AI generating vast amounts of analysis and data, the problem is often the opposite. Decision makers are just drowning.
Analysis paralysis.
Exactly. The sheer volume overwhelms our capacity to process it effectively, leading to delays, confusion, and sometimes worse decisions, not better ones. The system gets choked by its own information output. We've maybe centralized data, but we haven't necessarily centralized meaning or clarity.
Interesting. Okay, what's next?
Challenge 2. Fragmented teams. This is amplified by remote work and purely digital collaboration tools. While flexibility is great, that lack of a shared physical space, that masjid effect we talked about, the central hub reinforcing culture and connection, it's often missing.
Right.
So teams can become physically and, more importantly, functionally disconnected. It's easier for misunderstandings to arise, for trust to erode, and for those digital tribes or silos to form and harden. Shared values can become just digital wallpaper, not the lived reality.
Yeah, harder to maintain that cohesive culture when everyone's just an icon on the screen.
It requires much more intentional effort. And the third challenge, which really cuts to the core ethical questions, ethical confusion in AI deployment. This is huge.
How so?
When organizations start using algorithms for significant decisions, hiring, loan applications, performance reviews, content moderation, you name it, they are injecting incredibly complex ethical questions right into the heart of their operations. Questions about bias baked into the data, fairness and algorithmic outcomes, transparency, or lack thereof, in how the AI makes decisions.
The black box problem.
Exactly. And if the organization's foundational system, its underlying culture and processes, already lacks that deep commitment to justice and fairness we saw was so vital in Medina, how can we possibly trust the algorithms built by that flawed system? Algorithmic bias isn't really a new problem. It's often just the latest, fastest, most scalable manifestation of pre-existing human biases and systemic inequities.
That's a really powerful connection. The tech reflects the underlying system, warts and all. Okay, so given all this, the historical echoes, the modern bureaucratic sludge, the new AI complexities, how do leaders today actually apply those core principles? Justice, Accountability, standardization, adaptability. What's the practical framework for leading with that structure plus spirit and balance in this messy world?
Well, I think it has to start with real intellectual honesty, which leads to step one, diagnosis. Leaders need to stop just throwing solutions, a new training program, another software tool at problems they haven't accurately diagnosed.
Right. Is the problem really the people?
Exactly. Is it genuinely about individual skills or motivation? Or is the issue actually the system? Are the established processes so convoluted, so broken, that they make it impossible for even good people to do good work? Or, deeper still, is the problem rooted in the core values and culture? Is there a fundamental lack of trust, a pattern of ethical compromises that's poisoning everything?
So don't treat a systemic cancer with a Band-Aid training session. That's the common failure mode, isn't it?
It really is. Once you have an honest diagnosis, then comes step two. Alignment. This is the modern equivalent of invoking the Charter's authority. It's non-negotiable. Every significant action, every new policy, every major decision, especially around adopting new technology like AI, it must be explicitly measured against and aligned with the organization's foundational values, primarily justice and accountability.
Okay, give me an example.
Let's say you're considering an AI tool to speed up resume screening for hiring. Great potential for efficiency. But during the alignment check, you ask, does this tool demonstrably uphold our commitment to fairness? Is it transparent in its criteria? Does it risk introducing or amplifying bias against certain groups? If the answer is yes, it risks bias, or if it's opaque, then it fails the alignment test. Full stop, even if it promises huge efficiency gains.
So the values act as a hard filter for any new initiative or technology. You might have to sacrifice some potential efficiency if it compromises fairness or transparency.
Absolutely. The long-term health and trustworthiness of the organization depend on that discipline, which flows directly into step three, improvement via technology. Use AI, use digital tools, but use them strategically. Use them specifically to simplify existing processes, to enhance transparency, to reduce friction, not just to add another layer of complexity or another dashboard nobody understands.
So the goal of tech should be simplification and clarification, serving the core values.
Yes. If you use AI to automate tedious admin tasks, freeing people up for more valuable work, great. If you use it to provide clearer insights from complex data so people can make better, fairer decisions, fantastic. But if you use it to create an opaque black box that makes decisions no one can explain or appeal, you're just building a faster, more efficient form of bureaucracy and potential injustice. The tech must serve simplicity and human values.
Got it. Simplify, clarify, align with values.
Mm-hmm.
And the final step, it sounds like it goes back to people and connection.
It has to. That's step four, culture building. This is the continuous, active work of rebuilding trust and fostering unity, especially among teams that might be geographically or digitally scattered. Leaders have to consciously invest in creating and nurturing a shared ethical culture.
How do you do that in practice?
You model the values relentlessly. You reward collaboration and collective purpose over siloed thinking or internal politics. You create forums for open dialogue about ethical challenges. You make justice, transparency, and shared responsibility the things that actually get people recognized and promoted.
Yeah.
You have to intentionally replicate the unifying effect that the Charter and the Masjid had in Medina, making those core values the most valuable currency within the organization. That's the only sustainable way, I believe, to make complex, modern, often decentralized organizations function both effectively and ethically.
Wow. This journey through history has really brought some fundamental truths about organization building into sharp focus, spanning centuries, but the core lessons feel absolutely urgent for today.
They really do.
So let's just quickly recap those essential nuggets for everyone listening. We saw how that early community in Medina managed to build something strong out of utter chaos, fundamentally because they didn't just rely on charisma, they built robust systems.
Mm-hmm. Systems explicitly rooted in justice and accountability. That was the key innovation, replacing the volatile dynamics of tribal power and blood feuds with a transparent, inclusive system based on a written charter and impartial law.
And then operationally, they achieved excellence through that blend of discipline and agility.
Exactly. That balance of expert delegation, getting the right value-aligned people into key roles and empowering them, standardization of crucial processes like zakat and treaties to eliminate ambiguity and build trust, and critically, adaptability, being willing to ditch tradition and innovate, like with the trench when the mission demanded it.
And the big takeaway for leaders navigating today's world, especially with the rise of AI, it seems to be about finding that balance again. Structure without the animating spirit of values just creates soul-crushing bureaucracy. But spirit without structure just dissolves into well-meaning chaos.
Precisely. The best, most resilient, most effective organizations going forward, especially in this complex age of AI, will be the ones that are absolutely, unequivocally grounded in clear ethical principles. Systems designed intentionally to simplify, clarify, and uphold justice.
Okay, so before we wrap up, we always like to leave you, the listener, with something concrete, a final provocative thought, maybe an action challenge, to help take this knowledge out of the realm of theory and into your own world.
Right, because the goal isn't just to understand the history, it's to apply the principles. So reflect on the power of that Charter of Medina creating agreed-upon rules from scratch. Now think about your own sphere of influence. It could be your team at work, a project you're leading, maybe even your local community group.
What's the challenge?
The challenge is this. Try creating a mini constitution for that sphere. Sit down, maybe even today, and establish, say, 5 absolutely non-negotiable principles for how your group will operate, and center them specifically on justice, transparency, and accountability within your context. Write them down. And then communicate them clearly. As the new fundamental rules of engagement for everyone involved, make them the standard against which decisions are measured.
I like that. A practical way to build your own charter.
And one final point of reflection tied to the AI discussion. Identify one specific process or workflow in your organization right now that feels overly complex, opaque, or maybe just inefficient. Ask yourself this critical question. How could I potentially improve or enhance this using digital tools, maybe even AI, while making absolutely certain that I prioritize human values and simplicity above all else?
So the filter is key. Does the tech make it simpler, fairer, more transparent?
Exactly. If the proposed tech solution adds complexity, reduces transparency, or potentially introduces unfairness, then you haven't found an improvement. You've identified a system or a tool that needs correction, or perhaps rejection, not deployment. Keep human values front and center.
Challenge the systems around you. Demand clarity. Demand fairness. That feels like the enduring work of real leadership, inspired by this deep dive.
Well said.
Thank you so much for joining us for the deep dive. We hope this gave you a lot to think about. We'll see you next time.